Hello, I'm going to walk you through the OG Plus Fidelity Companion, which partners with the OG training that you already participated in. What this is a replacement of, with lots of additions to the blue flip chart. So here I am at the table of contents, Roman numeral 3. And what I'd like to highlight for you is if you look at the practices in each of these OG Plus lift, it's that little lighter turquoise color, those are the practices you trained in. In Wayzata, we were looking, because we already have a Tier 1 curriculum, at ways to intensify through multimodal practice, as well as more repetition for those students who really benefit from that. That is what OG Plus Lift is here. So when it says OG Plus Lift, that will mirror what we practiced in training. What IMSI OG has done in order to provide more of a Tier 1 look at those practices, a scaled back version, a little less repetition, a little less tactile learning, will just be here: cumulative review, 3-part drill, letter formation. It's going to have a lot of the same process, but less repetition and sometimes a little bit different materials, but I will show you that. Then there's sections on syllable division. If you turn the page to Roman numeral 4, you will see what's not included in the blue flip chart. Here are some practices for reading fluency and comprehension you can take a peek at on pages 34 through 40. And then on 41, you'll have those same visual cues that are page 9 of the blue flip chart, and then weekly lesson reminders, which are also in the blue flip chart. So let's take a look. And here it says OG Plus lift pages in the Fidelity Companion are designed for intervention instruction, or I would say are for intensified instruction. What you will see throughout this Fidelity Companion, I'm going to show you larger on the next page, but is more attention to the gradual release and error correction procedures, as well as notes on differentiation. Here is, you will find these larger throughout, but it's going to have gradual release and specific reminders about removing both visual and verbal scaffolds. These are things that I say in training, but they weren't printed in the blue flip chart. So now it's not only that we're saying, yes, remove the scaffolds, remove some of the verbal or visual, but it's right here in this Fidelity Companion. The correction procedure is something that I model in training, and they're now calling it PIMS, which is a new acronym to IMSI-OG, but it is that opportunity to pause and honor what was partially correct. So pause and praise, even if it's a partial accuracy, that leads to identifying the error, modeling that correction, and immediately providing students the opportunity to practice that correction. So that's the PIMS correction procedure. And you'll see it within each of the practices. In the Fidelity Companion, something that was not in the blue flip chart, you will see some specific directions if you're doing some oral blending and segmenting, phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. Then you'll see the PIMS routine right there with that modeling, that corrective feedback. You'll see some information on word chaining, again, blending in phonemic awareness alongside letters, using manipulatives for word chaining. Then you get to the 3-part drill. This is page 6, but what I'm going to do is go forward to page 8. When you see this OG Plus lift, page 8 will mirror exactly what you practiced in training. It will have the same T for teacher, S for student, along with that script. For example, here the student is saying B. B spells B because we want that sound coming out of their own mouth to their own ear, as that's what they need to do when they write. They need to articulate the sounds and think about the letter that's linked. When I go back to page 6, you will see a similar routine, but rather than sand, there is a whiteboard here. So it's a little less multimodal. We've always said sand or another medium, as there are other options besides sand. Now it's here in the blue flip chart. Otherwise, the directions there are the same, but they have some more examples for differentiation and the 3 times rule. Some of these things were in the training manual, but now they're right here in one resource. So there was that OG Plus lift. The vowel intensive is exactly the same here. Here is, vowel intensive drill with notes for differentiation. phonics teaching a new concept, one thing I'd like to highlight, this is the same, but rather than having a sand tray here for the new sound dictation following letter formation, they just say, just get out a whiteboard. And that's always something that I said, sand or another medium, because you're just doing a quick practice. So possibly getting out the sand for materials management is not always the best use of time there, unless you're going to, like on the 3-part drill, you use it, for 2 to 3 minutes. So that makes the quickly getting it out worth it. This could be a whiteboard. It could be writing the sound, on the carpet with the finger. It could be in the air. Everything has, different benefits, but here they just put in a whiteboard instead of the sand. Letter formation, here's page 14, but if you go ahead to 16, that will be, there's the OG plus lift there. Oops, sorry about that. So anytime you see OG plus lift, that's what you were trained in. Screen and green crayon, lots of repetition. When I go back to page 14, a little less repetitive, and it uses a pencil, but they're still tracing it. You're still using the same language. So the process is very similar, but it's scaled back a bit. There's that teaching new concept advance for the grade 1 guide on up. You're going to see practices for the decodable reader. There was a page in the flip chart on that, but here you're always going to see a blue T for teacher, S orange for student. So you'll see that going with those decodable readers. Notes for differentiation and teacher tips. Here is the word dictation, and they also are now calling it phonics spelling, which is what it always was, but they're just being really clear that the word dictation is that spelling part. So what you will see here is more intentional notes on fading the use of visual cues. So we start out, with the sound lines. We sometimes add mini lines or a digraph line or a heart for the QU. But here it says days 2 and 3, fade the use of visual cues. That's something I always said, to fade the use of both visual and verbal. For example, if the students know how to pound and tap, once you've modeled that, you do not need to be modeling that, if they do not need it. So fade those supports. I say as they need them. It depends on the concept and the student. So it might be days 2 or 3, it might be longer, but we want to start taking out those supports because the goal is moving them to independence. So you'll now see that right within the Fidelity Companion. Same thing for sentence dictation. It will give you, notes, days 2 and 3, fade the use of the visual cues. We're doing that if we're ever having students just write words on a whiteboard without the use of those, sound lines or write lines. So there that is. Here's red words. I'm going forward to page 28 because 28 is OG plus lift. So just a reminder, this will mirror what you are used to. You'll go through all that practice. It's a lot of repetition, a lot of tactile experience, not only through the screen and red crayon, but through the large motor of standing and arm tapping. And when we go back to page 26, there it is a little less intensified. They're just using a pencil to write, because that can also be a good practice. There is, you'll see like it just says arm tap 1 time while stating the letter names aloud, rather than 3 times, as in the more intensified OG plus lift. So just some things to consider. As we move forward, there's that syllable division routine that we learned and that I taught you songs for and chants for. And then following that, you'll see syllable division fast track. It's more for older students or students who are really starting to see those parts, that rather than going through the whole process, because that's a means to an end, the goal is reading it in connected text and taking those words apart. Here it just models circling any prefixes and suffixes or morphemes, and then just the student using their finger to scoop those parts. That can be done in simpler words as well when students are just finding the parts and moving on. So just a little bit faster process. There's the 3-syllable division. And then what you'll find at the end are some practices like the rapid word chart, or fluency pyramids, more notes on decodable reader. You'll see those fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension pages that are new to the flip chart, but were always important. Just some information on reading strategies, They're on page 41. There's those visual cues. Nothing has changed there. There's some teacher tips. Weekly lesson reminders. That was also page 10 in the blue flip chart. And that is it. So please reach out to myself, to a literacy coach, a literacy specialist if you have questions or want to look at this together. But I wanted to provide an overview as I know you're receiving them. Thank you.